Good Tuesday morning to you. This week's devotional is going to focus on identity. Now, you may have heard on Sunday that I am in quarantine. I came down with a cold last week. I did test at the beginning of the week on Monday and Tuesday night, worrying a little bit about how cold symptoms and this latest variant of COVID overlap, and my tests were negative. So into almost to the weekend when I was actually feeling really good, my neighbors came positive, and so my sister said, you probably want to just take another COVID test to make sure. So Saturday morning, I took another COVID test as I was at the end of what I felt like was a cold, and all circumstances led me to believe it was a cold, and here it was positive. So at the end of my 10 days will be Thursday, and I'll be back in the office, and I'll be looking forward to getting back to work in the sense that we look at it and think about it. But until then, I'm at home, and Pastor Tom made a joke in his sermon, I think appropriately so, that I'm at home feeling pretty good, and so you all should pray for me. Actually, what you should do is pray for my family, because I'm driving them a little nuts in the midst of cleaning, reorganizing, having some fun with time I usually am not given. So, the essence of time, that gift of time, that ability to be still when you least expect, has me thinking about identity. And this week, I want to focus on 3 questions of identity. Today, I want to think about who are you, or who am I? Tomorrow, I want to talk about who do people see us as? What do people see in us? And then Thursday, I want to focus on how does Jesus see us? Or how does God see our identity? So those 3 phases. First is the me, is the you, is the internal. This time of having to be still, and I'm a process thinker, so I think really well when I'm scrubbing floors. And I think really well when I'm reorganizing a closet. So you can mock me, that's okay, I'll take it. But that's when my brain really helps to process through things. And then at the end of the day, I love to be still and just, sit by a fire or read a book or have some just quiet time. And all of that processing, it's like the dust falls and I see what settles. And it's kind of a beautiful way that my brain loves to work. But I've been thinking about that question of who am I? And I was supposed to preach last weekend, and so I did a lot of prep on this interesting story that happens in the Gospel of Luke where Jesus heals a demonic man. And I'm going to use this as kind of the background to what I want our questions, what I want our devotionals to look like this week. So Jesus has been on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. He has healed a storm. This comes in Luke 8. And as we get into Luke 8, verses 27 and through that passage, a man encounters Jesus. So if you read Luke 8, verses 27 through 29, that's the passage that's going to encompass our weekend. And I know Pastor Tom preached on this a little bit through Sunday, but I may have a different focus because I want to focus on identity. So that's the backdrop, right? So Jesus has this man approach him. He has just calmed the sea. There was a great storm that happened while they were on the boat. He has calmed the sea. He's shown his disciples his power and authority over the winds and the sea. And as he comes onto dry land, a man approaches him. Now they're on the eastern side, way on the opposite side of Galilee. And they are as far removed from civilized society as one can get, at least in a Jerusalem thought process. And so he comes onto dry land, and a man immediately approaches him. And what do we know about this man? Well, we know that for a long time he wore no clothes. He was naked. He did not live in a house, but lived in the tombs. That's not to say he didn't have a house. He didn't live in a house. And I'll get to that on Thursday. But he lived in the tombs. And at that time in ancient Israel, the land is very cavernous. And so the tombs often were hewn caves that just naturally occurred. They would look at these caves and they'd bury bodies, and they roll a stone in front of them. after 3 years, they'd come and they'd remove the bones of the person, or they'd stack the bones and they'd put more bodies in, and that's just how the tombs worked. So this is where he lived. He lived among the dead. And he was tormented by evil spirits, demons, right? In fact, it would cause him to convulse, and he'd throw himself on the ground. So this was his life. He was tormented. And I think about this guy. I think about, how unclean he was in every sense of the word. He couldn't bathe, right? He wouldn't be with the society. People thought he was literally crazy. He was among the dead. So he was unclean from a Jewish standpoint. He was the unclean of the unclean. He was so removed from society that there was no society for him. If we have a hard time imagining what this guy looks like, drive down Commercial, go downtown, go down to Market Street. It's not hard for us to gather an image of what it's like to be so removed from society that you no longer have a society in which to exist. We call this homelessness. We call this mental defect. We call these all sorts of labels that have become normative in our society, but this is what this man is experiencing. And I think about him in perspective to me. And I want you to think about him in perspective to you. Because this text, this story exists in all three of the synoptic gospels. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it exists for a purpose. And it's such an odd story. It's such an extreme story of human brokenness that I have to think that it exists there for a reason. So if we think about him, and if we think about us, where are there connections? Are there correlations? Do we ever find ourselves removed from our community because of our own brokenness? Maybe it's only for a moment. Maybe it's not a lifetime, and I hope it's really not a lifetime, but maybe we find ourselves experiencing something or doing something that makes us feel removed. I have to say, with COVID, even though I did nothing but host a graduation party and stand on a football field with 300 high school graduating seniors and all of their families, I did nothing to remove myself from our community. And yet the circumstances require that I remove myself. And how do I see myself separate from the community? That's the who am I. This time has allowed me to create some reflection space. It has allowed me to ask the question, who am I? Who am I as God has created me? Who am I in my faults and in my failings? Who am I in my successes? Who am I when it comes to the bigger picture of the world and God's call that God gives to me and to those around me? To ask the question, who am I, not only helps me to start writing things that I like this is where I'm gifted and this is what I'm passionate about, but it also leaves me writing things that maybe I don't want to admit. Now, this is where I struggle. This is where I really have a hard time. This is where I'm not gifted. This is where I don't fit in. See, when we start to think about this man, we would be missing a huge opportunity if we assessed him as that guy and us over here, instead of realizing that we all have the capacity to be him. Richard Rohr has said in some of his writings that demons, for the ancients believed that demons were actually consumed thoughts. That a thought is not an external, but becomes your internal. That if you obsess about a certain thought, that becomes a demon. That's what the ancient voices have said, and Richard Rohr agrees with them. And I've been thinking about that. And certainly demons are a real thing, but demons manifest, and how we hold trains of thought that separate us and remove us from God has a demonic quality. So I started making a list. I started thinking about, what are the demons in my life? What are the demonic voices that I listen to more than I would like to? What are the Voices, if I don't want to call them demonic, what are the voices that simply separate me from the one who created me, from the community that God has given me? To make a list and to think about that helps me to think about who am I? Because our identity in Christ is secure. But we may not understand that identity until we look in the mirror and understand who we see ourselves as. The fact of the matter is, when we look in the mirror, we never see ourselves as God sees us. But we should name that. We should wrestle with that. Because that gap between who we see ourselves as and who God sees us as hopefully should close. It should become closer. And the only way to do that is to name what is really there. So for this man, he was naked. He lived in the tombs. He was removed from all sense of community. He had these demon possessions. He fell to the ground, and he comes before Jesus. In all that you carry, in all that you're proud of, and all that you like to hide, do you come before Jesus? Do you fall at his feet? Do you come to him in prayer? See, that's the beauty of the story, is it begins not with the craziness of this world, but it begins with the intersection of Jesus in the craziness. And if that's true for this story that happens in all three of the Synoptic Gospels, that's true for your life and for mine. So whatever your crazy looks like, maybe you have a wife that is stuck at home and is cleaning the garage and is moving your tools, and it's driving you a little nutty. Maybe there's other circumstances. Maybe some other illness. Maybe grief. Maybe the reality of death. Maybe the fear of what's happening in our world and in just the bigger aspect leaves us isolated. Maybe we don't even know how to return to life with all that we've learned these last few years. Whatever it is, sit down today. Make a list. Take some time to reflect. Who are you? Who do you see yourself as? Who do you think God sees you as? Write it down. Pray over it. Ask God to meet you in it. Because that's what this man does. He falls at Jesus' feet and he asks God to meet him in it. The question today is, who am I? Tomorrow we're going to talk about who others see you, who others see me, and we're going to talk about community. And then we're going to talk about God on Thursday. Hope you have a great week.